Hi folks. So today we're going to populate our camp a little bit. I want to take a look at creating some other custom items and NPCs. Some of it will already be familiar, but bear with me. There are some new elements we'll be looking at here, and I'd like to use this as setup for the next tutorial, in which we'll be going a little bit deeper into scripting once more. So populating camp with goblins can be as straightforward or as challenging as we want to make it. If we explore our creature palette, we can already see that there are a number of pre-made goblin NPCs available for us to be low-level generic bad guys if we should require them. However, I am a big fan of doing things from scratch, especially if you're learning something new. Once you're able to understand how something works by making it yourself, it'll be much easier for you to manipulate existing templates later. I think technical lessons are also much more likely to stick when you're putting your own creative spin on things. So, as always, please feel free to go as elaborate as you like. I'm going to show you some of the basic tools that we can use to get started. So, the thing I want to do for my custom goblins is to make a faction. Factions are an important gameplay mechanic that group individual NPCs together under a common banner. NPCs that are part of the same faction will protect each other in combat and have a predetermined way of relating to NPCs of other factions. Very simply, we can see here that factions relate to other factions and to the PC in one of three ways. They can be hostile, which is a reputation of between 0 and 10. They can be neutral, between 11 and 89, or friendly, between 90 and 100. Faction members that are hostile towards you will attack you on sight. Faction members that are friendly will assist you in combat if they see you getting attacked. Neutral faction members will do neither. Faction relations also aren't always reciprocal. If we look at the Commoner and Defender factions, for example, this can be made apparent. Defenders are friendly towards Commoners, but Commoners are only neutral towards Defenders. So this makes sense. A City Guard, which would be a member of the Defender faction, will assist a Merchant, who would be a Commoner, in combat if the Merchant is attacked. But the Merchant won't assist the City Guard in the same way. We can use these two directional relationships to create some interesting faction dynamics. Here we're going to add a single new faction, which is going to be our Goblin Tribe. So let's branch it off the Commoner faction and then determine relations. To begin with, I'd like this faction to be neutral towards everyone and everyone being neutral towards it, so we can set all relations to 50. While story-wise, this doesn't really make sense. I mean, I'm sure our Rob the Merchant would have a few unfriendly things to say to these goblins. I don't want to impose the mechanical constraint of having these NPCs be aggressive from the get-go. Goblins aren't mindless and they do possess a certain degree of cunning, and they are typically quite cowardly, so they won't seek armed confrontation unless they are absolutely sure of their victory. Which means our PC wandering into the goblin camp might provoke some threats, but it's unlikely to immediately escalate to full on combat. However, it can do, and we will see how we can turn our goblins hostile in the next video. Great, so we've created our faction and now it's time to populate the camp. You can go as in-depth as you like on this, as always, but we really want at least 3 NPCs, both for story reasons and for the script I'm going to demonstrate in the next video. So just as a little refresher on the creature creator, we are going to make our first goblin NPC together, and then I will leave you to do the others. Feel free to go as creative as you like. Maybe you can add a pack of wargs or an ogre, something like that, something interesting as well. The NPC I'm going to make is the chief. So let's head over to the creature wizard and start that up. For the race selection, I'm going to choose Goblinoid. This group includes goblins, hobgoblins, bugbears, and a few other variations. This choice is not only thematically important, but it's also mechanically important, and we'll see how that works a little bit later on. You'll see that our default model for our goblinoid is a goblin, and it gives him one level in the humanoid class. Unlike the classes available to players, the humanoid class is a catch-all for various generic hostiles that you will be creating. It doesn't come with its own feats, class features, or spells, so a level 1 humanoid will be statistically weaker than our level 1 player who is a fighter or a wizard or whatever class they picked. But that's exactly what we want. However, since this is a chief, I'm going to boost him to level 2, and that will put him roughly on par with a level 1 player in terms of combat. In the appearance tab, I'm actually going to change him into a bugbear. Lore-wise, bugbears are just bigger, more aggressive goblins, and they often work together with them. For me, it makes sense that a bugbear would use his size and strength to take charge of a small tribe. Feel free to do otherwise if it doesn't make sense in the world that you're creating. In the factions tab, we're going to add him to our new goblin tribe faction. And then finally, we're going to need to give him a name. Unlike the NPCs of base races, we don't get a chance to auto-generate names here, so I'm going to go with the classic trope of fantasy naming conventions and combine two goblin-sounding nouns into a name. And so we witness the birth of Chieftain Rotjaw. Let's launch his properties and make some tweaks. First, let's take a look in the Statistics tab. He seems fairly balanced and will be quite a deadly melee combatant with 15 strength. He also has a total of 11 hit points, which will rival a first level warrior or paladin, but only 10 AC, which will make him fairly easy to hit. So I'm going to add a point of natural armor to him here, since I imagine his bugbear hide is quite tough. These are good stats, I think, for a level 1 boss. We'll discuss the stats for the minions a little bit later on. I think the minions should be significantly weaker. Next, let's check the Advanced tab and give him a sound set. I'm going to go with Bugbear Chief for this one, as I think it fits the character well. I don't think we need to do anything else with him just yet, but he is missing one thing that every good Bugbear Chieftain should have, and that's an imposing weapon to wield in battle against his foes. So let's make him something and go over how weapons work in the item editor. Let's open up the item wizard and decide what kind of thing would thematically fit for this bugbear. I was originally going to make this a two-handed club, but alas, that is not a weapon type in the base game. And a one-handed club seems a bit puny for a chieftain, so I decided to go for the next best thing and make a great axe. And as I started making the weapon, I began thinking about how a bugbear would get a hold of a giant axe in the first place, and how I could fit it in with the rest of the plot. So that gave me an inspiration for a name, so I decided to call it Gob Cleaver, for reasons that will become apparent very soon. Once we've done that, we can head over to the Appearance tab and customize the axe's appearance to something that we like. And then we can head over to Properties, where we can customize it further. So compared to the key and the ingots that we made in our last video, you'll see that the properties for weapons are much more extensive. I'm not going to go through each of these as there are far too many to cover, but generally there's a few basic types. You can increase or decrease the damage and attack modifiers. You can add enhancement bonuses, add additional damage types. So for example, the axe can deal fire damage on hit as well as its normal damage. You can cast spells and even affect your own defenses, such as armor class and spell resistances. So you can combine as many of these features as you like to create some really interesting combinations. In one of my own modules, I've got a number of berserker weapons that deal increased damage but decrease your armor class. So towards the bottom of the list, you will also see that we have a number of use limitations. These are great for thematic purposes. So maybe if you have a sword that is a holy relic and can only be used by good aligned characters, or an ancestral axe that can only be used by dwarves. Finally, we've also got some nice visual effects as well that will apply to the blade and make the weapon look much more unique. I would encourage you to look through the various features by yourself. For now, we're just going to add one thing to the axe. So, true to its name, Gob Cleaver is a magical axe that deals extra damage to goblinoids. This is where our NPC race selection from earlier comes in. If we add the modifier damage bonus versus racial type, we can specify that type to be goblinoids. Now, anything with the goblinoid race template hit by the axe will receive the extra damage. We can also edit this property. All properties added are added to their lowest value by default. So this is going to be a +1 damage. To edit this value, we can simply double click on the property and select what we need. I'm going to give this axe an additional 2 slashing damage. Great. So now that this weapon has a unique property, we see that the identified box becomes available. So let's leave that unchecked for now. If the player manages to kill the chieftain and acquire his axe, they won't know the exact properties of it and will have to get it identified, probably by our helpful merchant quest NPC, before they can use it. Now that we've done that, we can move on to the descriptions. Because our axe starts out unidentified, we need to fill in both of these description boxes. So let's think about how to make this make sense. When first encountering the axe, the player isn't aware of its magical properties, just that it is a magical item in some way. They're also not going to be aware of the axe's name or history or any of the lore behind it. It will just display as unidentified great axe in their inventory. So for the unidentified description, it makes sense to only describe things that the player can directly observe without knowing anything about the axe. We can therefore keep it quite brief and just mention any physical features it has. So for example, a heavy great axe with a jagged blade forged of some dark grey metal. Strange runes are etched into the handle. Great. So now when the item is identified, the player realizes that this is a unique weapon, or at least part of a unique set of weapons, with its own background lore and history. This doesn't have to be extensive, but we are now able to provide additional information for context. So I'm going to write some description out here and then I'll read it out to you once it's done. Okay, so for the identified description, I've got the dwarves of Deepholm forged a number of weapons from rare grey iron to fight the goblin incursion against their mountain fortress. When the dwarven stronghold fell, many of its defenders escaped to the surface to continue to work as mercenaries, taking their weapons with them. Despite its age, the oaths of hatred inscribed upon the hilt of the axe continue to lend it untold goblin slaying power. Fantastic. And just to test that this is working correctly, we're going to spawn 2 copies of this axe into the world. Now, this is quite an important bit that we've avoided discussing directly, but I think now is a good time for it, and it is vital to our understanding of how objects work. Every game engine that you will work with or use will have the exact same concept, and it also relates directly to the programming relationship between classes and objects, so this is an important bit to get right. What we've just created is the blueprint for Gob Cleaver. If you're familiar with other engines, this is similar to a prefab in Unity or a blueprint in Unreal Engine. It's also similar to a class in any object-oriented programming language. Essentially, this is an abstract representation of something. It's a template or a set of instructions for telling our engine how to make a particular object, in this case, Gob Cleaver. But Gob Cleaver doesn't currently exist within our game world. If the player launches the game just now, they won't ever know that Gob Cleaver exists because it can't be found anywhere in the game. What we're going to do now is spawn Gob Cleaver twice. In programming terminology, we are creating two instances of the Gob Cleaver blueprint or class. Unlike our blueprint, these are concrete objects that exist in the world. The blueprint is used as a set of instructions by the engine to determine what it looks like, what properties it has, and so forth. The interesting part is that these now exist separately from the blueprint and from each other, which means that we can adjust the properties of one object without affecting the other. To demonstrate what I mean, let's pick one of the two axes we've just spawned and right-click on it and select Properties. Now, this screen looks identical to the one that we've just been working with, but it's actually different. Here we're managing the properties for the object for this particular copy of Gob Cleaver rather than for the blueprint, which means that any changes that we make here don't propagate to the other copies of the same axe. So let's demonstrate by heading over to Properties and checking the Identified checkbox, then clicking OK. Now we can test launch the game and see how different our two axes look. We can see them on the ground here next to each other. On the left is Great Axe Unidentified, which is the default version of our axe from the blueprint. On the right is Gob Cleaver, the exact same object, but with the identified property enabled. Provided we've done everything right, we should be able to pick both of those up and examine them. And you will see that they will have the appropriate descriptions for their identification status. Excellent. I hope the difference between concrete objects and abstract blueprints is a little clearer for this example. If not, don't worry, we'll have the chance to go through it again quite soon. In the interest of time, let's do one final thing and then I will let you populate the rest of the camp to your liking. Let's spawn a copy or an instance of our chieftain into the world. He can be found in the custom palette under whichever subheading you've placed him in. I've got him under humanoid bugbear. So let's grab him and put him somewhere next to the chest for now. Now let's right click and examine, then head over to his inventory. Go over to custom items, grab our Gob Cleaver from the axes section and drag it into his primary weapon slot. We get a notification that the bugbear doesn't have proficiency to equip the item. Disaster. NPCs of the humanoid class come with no basic proficiencies or feats, so almost any piece of equipment will require us to add things manually if we want humanoids to wear them. The engine will do this for us by adding the feat weapon proficiency marshal to the bugbear. Perfect. We can now click OK and go back to the creature properties, and we will see that our chieftain is the proud owner and wielder of the mighty Gob Cleaver. So now it's time to get creative. If you want to go through the process of creating every NPC from scratch, like we've just done, that's absolutely fine. If you're eager to get ahead, I'm going to show you a quick shortcut which we can use for some of our basic NPCs. So let's go over to the monster palette once more and head over to the standard tab. There are various creatures that are available in the base game, and we'll see that if we open up the humanoid goblin menu, we already have some pre-made goblins that would be ideal for our purposes with some minor modifications. So let's select the first goblin and right click, then edit copy. This essentially makes a custom copy of the existing standard blueprint. The goblin is already almost perfect for our purposes. we can see that it has a challenge rating of 1/4, which is great for a low-level minion. If we look at its stats, you can see they are significantly lower than that of our chieftain. The only thing we really need to change is the faction that this creature belongs to. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the Advanced tab and change that out. Afterwards, feel free to make any other custom changes. I'm going to change this guy's name to Basher and give him a club rather than Morningstar. So once I'm happy with it, I can click OK, and we see that the new blueprint now appears in our custom category. So now I'm going to do a quick time skip and show you my camp. Then you can do your own, or feel free to pause here and do your own now. Remember, we do want at least 3 tribe members, including the chief, for our next video, but feel free to make more. So here we are, this is my camp. I've made a couple of other goblins and equipped them. We've got Basher, he's a frontline fighter. Taking a quick look at his stats, he is quite puny. And I've upped his strength a little bit from the default stats because he is a fighter. And I've just equipped him with a basic club and nothing else. Then we also have Shooter. He is almost identical, except I've increased his dexterity instead of his strength, and I've given him a slingshot instead of a club. If you're adding a ranged weapon to an NPC, do remember to add the required ammo as well. Just one bullet or arrow or bolt or whatever the weapon takes is fine. They won't run out. And then lastly, I've also given Shooter a pet warg pup called Fluffy. The standard warg is a little too powerful, so instead I actually used a badger as a basis for Fluffy. And I've just changed out the model, the name, and the sound set. If you're using the enhanced edition of the toolset, you can also do the same scaling trick on NPCs as we did on our suit stain a few videos ago. So you can just hold down control and then use your mouse wheel to scale the NPC. Great. So we've skimmed over quite a lot of things today. As always, I do encourage you to spend more time on anything that you find particularly interesting. Feel free to make custom gear for all your camp denizens, spend more time on the decoration, or whatever else you would like to do. I think the big technical point today was trying to understand the difference between blueprints and objects, and I hope that this is a little bit clearer for you now with the axe example. It might be quite tricky to get your head around at first if you're not used to thinking about it in this way, but the more work you do with objects, the clearer it will become. Of course, if you do have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. From the writer's perspective, let's have a think about how all the elements that we've added today connect back to our story. For example, my bugbear chieftain now wields an axe specifically designed for killing goblins. What does this mean for the wider context of the plot? It probably means that his tribe are afraid of him, that he probably rules through fear rather than devotion. It might mean that his goblin underlings are dissatisfied, and there might be room for mutiny if someone noticeably stronger than the chieftain makes themselves apparent. Also, where did the chieftain get this dwarven axe? Is there a camp of annoyed dwarves nearby that we can call on for help? Adding a simple item with one quirk can open up a ton of new ideas and directions for our storyline. As long as the existence of a story element is connected to something else, even indirectly, we can make a compelling narrative out of just about any simple object. Obviously, this is just one very simple example that we came up with on the fly. You might have a different chieftain or several or different items that you want to add to your own campaign. The important thing to think about is how they relate to the rest of the world that you're creating. If we want to create a realistic, immersive world, your NPCs, even the low tier villains, should have some sort of overall personality or motivation, rather than be generic blocks of hit points for your player to chop through. Right, so I think I've gone through quite a few things today, so I will wrap up here for now. In the next video, we're going to go back and do some more scripting work. I'll be introducing a new important programming concept that we've not looked into yet, so I hope you can join me for that. And as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you again soon.